Hi, I'm ED-SKaR, and I'm not on my bike today because I've had to re-record my intro. But I did go to a bolt action event run by the Outriders MK at Wargames Workshop. And this time we had an interesting change to the usual rules. That being doing away with the 12 order dice limit. Now, usually the 12 order dice limit is brought in as a house rule to help balance the field. It's a little bit restrictive and it prevents quite a few different playstyles, like the British Home Guard, Soviet conscript armies, and Japanese island defense, to name but a few. But this time we're doing away with that, and so everyone's bringing a lot more units than normal. So let's have a quick look at the army that I've brought, and then we can talk about the games.
And so here are my 18 units. Whilst I was building the list, I did come up with some crazy ideas and even managed to write a 38 order dice list for 1,000 points, which, whilst very funny, would actually be really terrible in the game. What I wanted to take advantage of with having an unlimited dice pool here is to have a big infantry blob, a kind of mobile section of units like I often do, but also taking advantage of having a bunch of small teams as well. And I can even squish in some veterans, and so it's hardly that cheesy. For the infantry blob, there are some familiar models here. The free rifles that appear in every Soviet list, the Strafbat political prisoners, and the NKVD in their nice blue hats. In the middle here are my brand new veteran scout squad, and I've modelled cloaks on them in the same way as my Tanith for those viewers who remember that project. And at the back are a tank rider squad, again something I usually take, and this is a pretty expensive squad even though there's only 6 of them because they have the body armour which keeps them very well protected. For my officer I got them 2 assistants, all with submachine guns, because I can use an order die to give them a jeep to get up close and personal and use them as a mini assault squad. But here from Bad Squiddo is my commissar. Usually I really can't justify 15 points for an order dice when there's a limit on order dice. And so this may be the only chance I can really take a separate commissar model, and so she'll be looking after the infantry blob. All the small teams, the anti-tank dog, light mortar, flamethrower and sniper with an ampumetz shown in the middle. Again, I usually can't take all so many small teams at once, but today I can. Another couple of units have shown up before is Stalker the armoured car, the Ziz-3 anti-tank gun, and the last ones off in the corner are some cheap soft skin transports. 1 truck for an infantry squad and the 2 jeeps for an officer and whichever small team is most useful for any game. And I forgot to mention the tank riders are going to be on the T-70. Game 1 for me can ultimately be summed up in a single sentence. Their artillery observer dropped a barrage on most of my army, and whilst causing no casualties, the pins stayed with me the whole game, and I was basically unable to achieve much. The objective for this game is to drag that little radar dish off of the board, and that stayed put the entire game, and so technically it was a draw, but on kill points for the ranking, good grief did I do poorly. My infantry blob rolling up the middle took the brunt of the artillery barrage, and whilst my commissar did get things moving, causing 2 friendly fire casualties along the way, the Strafbat got themselves wiped out without really trying, and the free rifle squad found a flamethrower. Not my one though. I did set up my scouts in this building up at the top, but it was just close enough to get caught in the bombardment, and those 3 pins meant their rifle shots were always at negatives to hit. I did manage to sneak my flamethrower up and do a little bit of damage to the opponent's Gurkhas, but not many before the fuel tank ran out. The right flank was probably the most successful part of this game for me. My tank riders did just a little bit of damage, but it wasn't enough to really score many points. Right at the end of the game, in a burst of hilarity, my commissar, now alone, did charge forward and took out a veteran squad with her pistol. It was the last remnants of an already shot up veteran squad, but still, it counts. My second time is my first time ever facing Italians. They aren't so popular in bolt action due to the terrible faction rule and not being so widely remembered historically either. With some larger veteran squads, it meant the Italians were quite well outnumbered by me, and I probably had double the order dice that they did. And I spread out over a much wider line than I might otherwise, chipping away at the edges of their forces and working my way in. There was a slightly cheesy move that I parked my truck in front of their Semavente. However, I think it's quite reasonable for the soldiers to have the idea of just crashing the truck into the tank hunter, and that's how I that's how I envisioned this actually went down. The middle saw action only towards the end of the game, and my little flamethrower showing up to wreak havoc before being mercilessly gunned down. A fun game with a new opponent, and I hope I haven't scared them off. For the last game, I get to explain stuff, which is my favourite thing in the world, as you might imagine being a video maker with explainy videos. This is a game mode that I came up with called We Shouldn't Even Be Here, and is a total mess of confusion that players have to wrangle into a usable situation, which is an all too common sight on a World War II battlefield, and those of other eras as well. The players roll off. The high roller chooses a long board edge and the low roller chooses a short board edge, and the long board edges are then split into two. This gives each player 3 entry points. All units start the game off of the table and roll for reserves, a standard rule in bolt action, and each time a unit is successful, they roll a d3 to see which table entry section they come on. This randomizes not just which units come on when, but also where they come on, and that requires players to organise their forces like a real officer might need to. For this game, I also came up with an objective based exactly on that, with each player scoring points for having units within the area effect of their officer's leadership bonus at the end of the game. And so, the game is all about bringing your force together, but also disrupting your opponent to prevent them from scoring. And just to tilt people a little way in favour of turtling, there's also bonus points for killing enemy units as normal. Although a lot of players tended to turtle anyway. So for me, half of my force came on my short board edge and a lot came on in my middle section, allowing me to gather fairly quickly and taking a lot of longer range shots at my opponent, who also got a lot of units from their short and middle board edges. Right in turn 1, they got a long range shot that blew up one of my jeeps, and I thought that my officer had been done in, which would entirely ruin my chances for the game, but I quickly realised my officer was in another jeep, and that it was actually my flamethrower that got toasted. My BA-64 fended off multiple units. They brought on right next to my longboard edge, and by fended off, I mean they didn't really do much and let them just kind of walk past. By the end of this one, my good units were all over the place and heavily damaged, and my cheap inexperienced mob was milling around my officer trying to work out what to do. But that means I scored a few points. My opponent managed to kill off my sniper just as they were getting range on my opponent's officer, saving them and allowing for quite a few points for them as well, which resulted in a draw. And so my 3 games, technically 2 draws and a win, but being so few points, I still ended up well below half on the leaderboard and got no prize. Sadness. But being able to bring so many units to mix up weapons teams and Inex and veteran and having the extra transport was lots of fun. There's always plenty of options for what you can do, but this lets you do everything at once, and it made for some really engaging games. Now, it's a long way short from being a competitive list, but it was fun to play. There are certainly some situations where having a lot of units on the field can overwhelm a smaller veteran force, and I think there was an element of that in my second game. But on the other hand, having so many weaker units, my opponents very quickly found ways of knocking off one here and one there and racking up quite a few points against me. And for things like artillery barrages, you just end up hitting a lot more units than you normally would. But I'm looking forward to next tournament, as we will be using one of the expansions for bolt action, and that should be very interesting. For now, I'm ED-SKaR, always will be, and thank you very much for watching.